see Mr. Krayden in the lobby there. We shall bring him in and start talking about some broader issues. This is David Krayden. He's been on the show a number of times now. He's our Western Standard Ottawa columnist. Always writes great stuff cutting into our federal government and the woke. Good to see you today, David.
Nice to be back, Corey.
I appreciate you coming on. So I kind of warned you about this. I usually don't with guests where I'm going to go with things, but, we can't help it. That kind of broke in the news late last night. And I see you've got a column in pending. I haven't had time to edit it quite yet, but the whole Roe v. Wade is suddenly back in the headlines. A decision from over 50 years ago is now contemporary news. Where do we go from here, David?
Well, I did put some thoughts together for this column, so I am prepared to talk about it. And I think we need to be thoughtful about this because the left in the States as well as Canada is going to be hysterical about this. And they're going to say and insist that this is about making abortion illegal. And in the first place, this is a draft opinion from one justice, and it's not even a final opinion yet. So, and obviously this leak occurred very coincidentally, but yet it wasn't, because the Democratic leadership was there with a news release within like half an hour of this leak coming out last night. I think it was 9:00. I was watching Sean Hannity, and it was breaking news. Politico had this leak. There was already protesters outside the Supreme Court within a half an hour. So this was a well-planned leak. The Democrats want to use this as a wedge issue in the midterm elections because they have nothing else to talk about in a positive way, obviously. Inflation is rampant in the States. Crime is crazy in the cities right now. Biden is investing billions in a war in Ukraine that is seemingly without end. And Biden himself rarely has a coherent moment. So he's dragging the party down with him. So abortion is something that obviously revs up the Democratic base. But I don't think it's going to be much of an issue because in the United States, the population is just about evenly split on abortion. It's almost 50-50. It's about 51-49. So it's not really a win or lose issue for either side. And I think most pro-choice people in the U.S., as well as Canada, by the way, are not for unrestricted abortion on demand, which is what Roe versus Wade really allowed, and which is what we have in Canada. We have no abortion law in Canada. And I have always argued that whether or not you're pro-life, as I am, or you're pro-choice, really where people meet in this country is that we need some restrictions on abortion. We need an abortion law. And I don't see anything wrong with raising the issue in a reasonable way and discussing it in a rational fashion. Because as I say in the column, there's nothing wrong with debate, in political debate. And they still have that in the United States. In Canada, we can't talk about abortion. And we're branded as some kind of crazy religious zealot, usually evangelical crazy religious zealot. We can't talk about gun rights in Canada. We can't talk about internet censorship in Canada. We can't talk about a variety of other issues because they've been settled all of a sudden. And then in the U.S., they still have the right to talk about these issues, and these issues are not settled. These issues are still open for debate. And I think that's good for democracy. And I think it's good that we still can discuss these things in the U.S.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the discussion should be loud. I just really didn't feel like having it, but there's no choice in the matter now. And as you said, with the leak, you can see the political motivation because the Democrats are really against the ropes in these midterms. I mean, they were not looking very good going into this fall, so they were going to need something radical. You know that Biden wasn't going to set the world on fire in the next 4 or 5 months, so maybe this wedge issue might be part of what pulls them out of the fire. I mean, we'll see how they're going to play this.
Well, they're already gearing up for it because both Pelosi and Schumer, House Speaker Pelosi and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, are talking about codifying Roe versus Wade in Congress. And if it gets stalled in the Senate, then they'll get rid of the filibuster where the Republicans could stall it. So it's part of the larger Democratic plan of changing the American system, of reversing what has worked in the American democracy. And I can also see them wanting to pack the Supreme Court because Biden has toyed with this idea. I don't think he's personally comfortable with it. It's probably the last vestige of the old Joe Biden. He's got some committees still looking at this as a possibility. But the left wing, the radical left wing of the Democratic Party wants to pack the Supreme Court with more members so they can get rid of the conservative majority on the Supreme Court. And I think that's where this is going to go as well with the squad, and for those listeners, that's the left wing, far left wing of the Democratic Party that's very vocal and in enunciating far left policies such as defund the police and other issues like that.
Yeah, well, this, whether, I've kind of said to some of the viewers a bit earlier and on Twitter as well, whether we like it or not, now this issue is going to spill over to us up in Canada, even though it wasn't front and center. I mean, I saw that Justin Trudeau, or his Twitter manager, somebody at least, made sure to jump out quickly and put out the whole, I stand for women and everything else. And by extension, what, of course, they're going to start saying is that the Conservatives don't. Do you think that tactic, I mean, right now the party's vulnerable. They don't have a particular leader in place to just boldly state what the direction of the party may or may not be. And the Liberals might have a chance to cut him up a little on this.
Well, for Justin Trudeau to say he stands for women, that's ludicrous. And nobody treats women with more disrespect. Nobody's put women in worse positions than Justin Trudeau. But I would say I know most of the pro-life people I know are women. And I think being a pro-life woman is quite common. So that's not even an argument. But the leading candidate for the Conservative leadership has pronounced himself to be pro-choice, Pierre Poilievre. And I think a lot of pro-life people are going to support Pierre Poilievre because he's the obvious winning candidate to beat Justin Trudeau in the next election. And as I say in the column, most voters and most conservative voters, small c or large c, are not single issue candidates. And I'm not either. I don't vote for people simply because of their stance on abortion. I vote for people on a variety of issues. And Pierre Poilievre is attracting voters because of his stand on a lot of different issues. And there's a lot of people will say that they might not want to support him because he's pro-choice. But a lot of pro-life people will support him because he's right on so many other issues. So if the Liberals try to use this against Conservatives again to demonize them for being pro-life, I mean, it's garbage. It's absolute nonsense. We have a right in the Conservative Party, or I should say Conservative voters have a right to be pro-life or pro-choice. The party does not take a stand either way on that. So it's up to the individual's conscience, and nobody, Justin Trudeau included, cannot dictate how conservative voters feel about an issue. They have a perfect right to be on either side of it. So once again, it's Justin Trudeau's authoritarian, dictatorial tendencies to insist that people agree with him, and I'm simply saying, forget it. Voters have a right to their own opinion.
Absolutely. Well, let's pivot away from that and get on to some of the other stuff. It's still good and inflammatory. Your column from yesterday was on the rolling thunder and not being a moment for Canada, but a great moment for Canada, but not for Ottawa's failed mayor. And now we're seeing, of course, they're really putting out how much, the terrible cost to the taxpayers was made by the security and keeping those bikers from tearing Ottawa down by its very foundations. What's your review of what you saw up in Ottawa this week?
Well, I was there for most of the weekend, and glad I was, because it was quite an incident and quite a weekend to behold. Not only because I was quite proud of the way the bikers maintained themselves and were quite dignified throughout the weekend. They were there obviously to pay their respects to veterans, and they spoke about loving your neighbor and no, we don't hate Justin Trudeau or the mayor of Ottawa. And what surprised me, though, and it shouldn't have, is the overkill, the overreach of the city of Ottawa. And I kid you not, I was standing in the corner of Elgin and Slater, waiting for the bikers to put on a demonstration of their of their motorcycle skill. And literally dozens of police officers descended from the Rito Center and in a very threatening manner marching. And I thought, this is like a scene out of a dictatorship in a third world country. I mean, why on earth would any mayor enlist this many police officers for a completely peaceful event? It wasn't even a demonstration. It wasn't even a protest. They were there to essentially speak at the cenotaph in support of Canada, in support of Canadian veterans. There was no threat, absolutely no threat. There was no hint of violence. And yet Jim Watson, again, the cowardly mayor of Ottawa, afraid that possibly a bouncy castle might have been erected on Wellington Street, or people might have been enjoying themselves somehow, was absolutely appalled by all of this, and insisted not only the Ottawa Police Service, but the OPP and the RCMP all get in the act. And what amazed me too is that the police were surprised that all of these working class and middle class people weren't comfortable with this, and that they were saying, go back to the Chateau Laurier and have a steak dinner. And that's where they all were holed up, of course. And they came out to intimidate and threaten these people. And they were surprised when they told them, just go back to your hotel. We're not bothering anybody. And there was no pushback from the public. There were a few of these so-called protesters of this unwelcoming committee, which I think I saw one or two of them. And there was no real pushback from the public at all. And it was a perfectly peaceful weekend. And it was nice to meet some of my fellow veterans, and I'm one myself. And it was a very proud moment for Canada, but once again, not one for Ottawa and this failed mayor, Jim Watson, who was once again running from people visiting his city. And that's all they were, was visiting his city for 3 days.
And if you're going to be in a capital city, you're going to have demonstrations or gatherings or things that happen. I mean, go to Washington, D.C. There's a park outside of the White House there where it's just perpetual protests that go on. It's part of the democratic right. You can ignore them or pay attention to them. And there's always events coming and going. The overreaction to anything in Ottawa was quite something to behold last weekend. I mean, this wasn't the same as the convoy protest by any means, but they reacted as if it was.
Yeah, they did. In fact, one of the bikers was saying they should announce that the next time they're arriving in Ottawa will be on Canada Day on July 1st, and see if the mayor tries to shut the city down for that, because it's quite ridiculous, because there's that many people on much more of a crowd on the streets on Canada Day, and much more potential for a security risk on Canada Day, but yet that's okay. But what really got me angry here, Corey, it was the following day on Sunday, which is the traditional May 1st, May Day, Communist Day celebrations. We had people walking around with the hammer and sickle flag, which somehow didn't elicit any outburst of outrage or anger from Mayor Watson or Justin Trudeau, the way the supposed prevalence of Nazi and Confederate flags did during the Freedom Convoy. And of course there weren't. There was one Nazi flag that had nothing to do with the Freedom Convoy. It was some crackpot who showed up to really try to interfere with the event. And I was aware of that from day one, and what was happening there. And I think there might have been one Confederate flag during the whole event. But here we had people carrying the hammer and sickle, and Justin Trudeau apparently thought that was okay, because there was no talk about hate symbols and whatnot. But the hammer and sickle flew over the Soviet Union for almost a century, and it represented a lot of hate, and it represented a lot of slaughter in the wholesale slaughter of millions, tens of millions of people who did not. Who did not conform to the Soviet way of life. And in the name of collectivization and uniformity, they died and were slaughtered by successive dictators. And that's somehow, I think that's not a symbol we should be flying in Ottawa either. But
no, I mean, I don't believe in banning either of them. I just think society should realize just how odious and disgusting both symbols are, and we sideline them. We realize these are fringe people. Yeah, you got the right to wave it, but you look like a clown and you're celebrating regimes that were odious and killed millions of people. And you're not part of.
Definitely. I am completely opposed to banning these symbols because it pushes things underground. And I believe we should be allowing people to speak freely and fly their flags, but we have to have open debate. And that's something Justin Trudeau doesn't believe in at all.
No, and lines get crossed. Steve Ruffin, one of our commenters there, pointing out, in Montreal on the 1st, I saw some video of that Antifa was out there, and they're black, and they were celebrating, May Day, of course, and the Communist Day, basically, and they were smashing some windows and things while they were at it. This is a group that has a history of violently protesting. They can't seem to quietly do it. They have to spray paint and smash things. And the government's terribly reticent on cracking down or raising the alarm bells when it comes to these guys whenever they show up somewhere. It just seems to be any conservative-leaning movements that suddenly threaten the stability of the nation.
Both here in the U.S., every time the left protests, and it's the same with Black Lives Matter, they cause billions of dollars of damage in the 2020 summer riots. And there was, every time they rioted, they were always mostly peaceful protests. That's all you heard from Democratic leadership and most of the mainstream media. And there's a famous scene, I think it's on NSNBC, where the reporter is standing in front of a building that's ablaze, and there are people looting everywhere. And he says, I'm standing in front of a mostly peaceful protest right now. And it's just, the irony is just so incredible. But we are living in an Orwellian world, as I constantly say, and the people who contribute most to that Orwellian world are the politicians and the mainstream media, and they just don't get the irony, and which to me is just incredible.
Yeah, and I remember that one. I think it said fiery, but mostly peaceful, and it said it right below it too. It was just you'd think this was a joke or satire, and it wasn't. And just before the show today, we have a number of TVs in the office. We're always watching everything in the newsroom and so on. And unfortunately, I got to glance at CNN every now and then, and I noticed they had a big map up on the wall, and they'd shaded, and they said outright, these are all the states that will almost assuredly ban abortion in light of the ending of Roe v. Wade if it gets overturned, and a bunch in yellow that they said might completely ban abortion. This is what they put on the front of their screen today. This is a news organization, such a highly speculative and presumptuous thing, and they think nothing of sticking that out there and inflaming people.
It's CNN is the home of disinformation, and they can keep pumping out the disinformation. I'm just glad there's alternatives in the States. They have Fox News. We certainly need a television network in Canada to compete with the likes of CBC, CTV, and Global. I thank God we have the Western Standard and other independents now to compete with the mainstream media, because I had to escape to the United States for 5 years in rights, because I was basically blocked from Canadian news because there was nothing left. But it's nice to see the resurgence of truth in news in Canada, and I thank God every day for organs like this that are out there with alternative news, out there talking about things that CBC won't talk about.
Well, and I appreciate the columns and the feedback. So thanks again for coming on today, David. I'm sure we'll be talking again soon, and we got more to look forward to coming from you in the future here.
Thank you so much, Corey. Always a pleasure.
All right. So yes, that's David Krayden. And if you go to the westernstandardonline.com, he writes great columns. Just search Krayden and you'll see all the ones. He's got a good listing of them there. Some, right up my alley of really getting the blood pressure up and working on those issues. David, of course, along with so many other columnists and reporters we've got out there as we are building. And as he was saying, we're building that alternative. We don't have Fox News, but we got things like this where we can candidly discuss these issues, because